right. Well, good morning again. Everyone hanging in their temp lives? Got a lot of fans going. Okay, we'll get this thing going. Has anyone ever had, someone you really look up to, or somebody you look up to in the past, or maybe even like a national icon type of thing we've looked to, but then we kind of get some better facts about it. Kind of burst your, you learn some new things about it. They kind of burst your bubble about them a little bit. And you kind of start wondering, were they really that important? Or, how do we handle that? The big controversy is, Christopher Columbus here a while back, his discovery and importance of the New World and everything. And so we have a national holiday. But, lots of people got up and tight because of him. A lot of disease was brought and wiped out a lot of people that were native to the area. And so they kind of started looking down at him. It doesn't discredit the immense things he already did, but, it starts making you wonder. It's like, how good was that? And you start to worry about that. And that kind of happened. And that's in Romans here, when Paul's been just going after the law like crazy, we're getting to a section here where he's going to go and turn to Abraham, someone held in very high esteem among the Jews, and really from the Jewish mindset, which we're going to go into, really drastically changed how the Jews viewed Abraham. To us, it won't have as much of an impact, but when it gets into the Jews there, what it was. Because this is a very important section, another great section. We have all of chapter 4. If you remember last week, we did 27 through 31. I mentioned how 27 through 31 is actually really a precursor to chapter 4. It's an introduction. It's to chapter 4. If we're to ever redo the chapters, that should be the start of chapter 4, would be 327. And I mentioned that. And so in a lot of ways, it's the introduction. It points to everything that's going to be talked about here in chapter 4. Because back in verse 27, it's talking about how our boasting is excluded. Right off the bat, Paul's going to make the point that Abraham has no right to boast. And then to verse 28, he says, because one is justified by faith, not works. And then we're going to see, like in today's message, we're going to go through verse 8, that Abraham was justified by faith and not works. And then verses, it's supposed to be 27, or 29 and 30. Circumcised and uncircumcised are united under the one God through faith. And then next week, we're going to talk about this, how the circumcised and the uncircumcised are united as children of Abraham through faith. You see how just that small 27 to 31 was an introduction to the entirety of chapter 4, which we'll cover over the next couple of weeks. Very important stuff he's continuing to build on. So we get your Bibles open to Romans 4 if you're not already there. We're going to read verses 1 through 8 together as we do Romans 4. Starting in verse 1. What then shall we say was gained by Abraham, our forefather, according to the flesh? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. For what does the Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. Now to the one who works, his wages are not counted as a gift, but as his due. And to the one who does not work, but believes in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted as righteousness. Just as David also speaks of the blessing of the one to whom God counts righteousness apart from works. Blessed are those whose lawless deeds are forgiven, and whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord will not count his sin. So the first thing, as I alluded to, is why is he spending a whole chapter talking about Abraham? What's the big deal about Abraham? Well, the Jews, they revered Abraham as their father. We even have Isaiah 51, 1 through 2. He says, "Listen to me, you who pursue righteousness. You who seek the Lord, look to the rock from which you were hewn, and the quarry from which you were dug. Look to Abraham your father, and to Sarah who bore you, for he was but one when I called him, that I might bless him and multiply him." And he's the first Hebrew. He's the one that God started the whole thing with. Some of the teachings of the Jewish teachings is they hold his life and his character as models for what to do. Some of the quotes from Jewish teachings from that time says, "Abraham was perfect in all his deeds with the Lord, and well-pleasing in righteousness all the days of his life." Another quote, "Abraham did not sin against thee." Of course, that's a translation. The last one, "No one has been found like him in glory." So Abraham was he was the example, the pinnacle of the Hebrew faith, how they held him. And the Jews stressed two things about Abraham. They said his righteousness is linked to his obedience when he was tested. When he went to take Isaac and sacrifice, he was tested in Genesis 15. And that righteousness needed to be linked with his circumcision, which didn't happen until Genesis 15. Oh, sorry, Genesis 17, so the wrong number. So Genesis 15 is when God counted him as righteousness, but the Jews taught that his righteousness was linked to his obedience, so works, doing things. And then further, even though it wasn't until later in his life that Abraham was circumcised, the Jews taught that those two need to be linked and become the same. Righteousness, obedience, and circumcision. And so that's why Paul focuses so much on Abraham, is all the stuff that Paul's been teaching on. Now he needs to take all that and apply it to Abraham, the pinnacle of Jewish living and model. And that's where his points are going to be. And he starts out in verse 1 and 2, making verse 1, 2, and 3 with this point, saying, "Even the work of the greatest doesn't mean anything to God." Even the work of the greatest, most faithful person you can imagine doesn't mean squat to God. That's what he's proving here in verse 3. He begins off in verse 1 with a rhetorical question, which Paul does a lot. He says, "What then shall we say was gained by Abraham, our forefather, according to the flesh? What shall be gained?" He's talking about the righteousness. And our forefather, our ancestor. Then he has this phrase, "according to the flesh," which is, what word is "according to the flesh" modified? What was gained according to the flesh? Or our forefather according to the flesh? Our ancestor according to the flesh? It's modifying the ancestor, our forefather, according to the flesh. So he's here in verse 1, he's focusing first that Abraham was the ancestor, the originator of all the Jews. Every single Jew alive was related to Abraham because he was the first Jew. He was the first Hebrew. And so he's going to continue to build off of that. Notice how he uses the word forefather, ancestor. Jump down to verse 11 and 12, where he's going to continue to build. We're going to get to this next week. In verse 11 and 12, he received the sign of circumcision as a seal of the righteousness that he had by faith while he was still uncircumcised. The purpose was to make him the father of all who believe. So here he's starting his argument saying, hey, we'll treat him as just the father of all the Hebrews, the father of all the Jews. But Paul's going to build his argument to point that Abraham is the the Father of everyone who believes. His relationship he had. So that's where he starts out with verse 1 and saying, building that. Verse 2, for if Abraham was justified by works, he had something to boast about. But not before God. Now, what in the world is he saying there? We got to go back. Remember to verse 27 and 28. When it says, what then becomes of a boasting, it is excluded, right? That's not even looked at whatsoever. It is excluded. Our works before the Lord and boasting in it, it's excluded. And so that's, building off of that argument, he pertains it to Abraham. He cannot boast before God. That's what he's holding. Because they are justified by faith apart from the works of the law. And that's another key difference here. Verse 28 where it says, for you hold that one is justified by faith apart from the works of the law. Now when you see works of the law, that's pointing to the Mosaic law. And that's what all the Jews would have been under at this time. But here in verse 2, he says, for Abraham was justified by works. Well, that's a change. Well, it's because, remember, there was no Mosaic covenant in Abraham's time. There was over 400 years to go before the Mosaic covenant would be given. So this is Paul pointing this to any work. Any work that you try to gain position with the Lord, anything trying to do to get a leg up on the Lord. That's what enables us today to, when we see the law, to be able to say, okay, for us it means trying to please the Lord without really having faith in Him, trying to think we can earn His favor. And that's what this means. So if Abraham was justified, he was made righteous by his works, he has something to boast about. But not before God. Because before God, our boasting is excluded. He's making that point. All of Abraham's works, everything he does, is excluded when it comes to his relationship with God. He cannot bring it before the Lord. In verse 3, I like it, Paul is building his argument, and what does he do to prove his argument? He brings Scripture to prove his point. It's great. Verse 3. For what does the Scripture say? The Old Testament for us, it says, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. Abraham believed God. It was counted to him as righteousness. Now this is from Genesis 15:6. And this is going to be it's a very important verse. Genesis 15:6 is the first time the word believe appears in the Bible. It connects believing with becoming righteous. And I want to go and I'm going to read the context of this. We understand what was going on, starting in verse 1 of chapter 15. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, Behold, ye have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. This man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, Look towards the heaven and number the stars, if you are able to number them. Then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. So that's the context. There's no big action here by Abram, who would later have his name changed to Abraham. There's no action or no great feat that Abraham does to earn the righteousness. In fact, in the context, What is Abram's relationship to God right now? He's doubting him. I don't got anything, Lord. I don't even have an heir. I don't have a son I can pass this on to. What's going to happen? The Lord says, no, I got you. I'll take care of you. See the stars? You're going to have more descendants than all the stars. And then, boom, he believed in the Lord. He didn't go out and do a crazy, majestic work of faith. All he did was believe. And the Lord counted it to him as righteousness. To believe. A word to think, to be true. All right, Lord, you are true. I understand you. You exist. It also means to trust. Okay, Lord, I count you as true, and now I'm trusting in you as well. It also means to have belief to the extent of complete trust. Complete trust. That's where our faith or belief can grow. Because all right, Lord, I acknowledge you as true, and I'm going to trust you, but that trust continues to grow and grow and grow throughout our walk with him. Our belief grows. And that's what's happening here. Now, this context is also, in Genesis 15, it's a repetition of the covenant that God made with Abraham back in Genesis 12. I'm going to hit on that now because it's going to be important in the weeks to come. Out of Genesis 12, this is the Abrahamic covenant. And we have. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you. This is when Abraham was still in the land of Ur, hundreds of miles from Israel. He hadn't even come out of his father's land yet. He wasn't even there. This is God calling him out and saying, this is what I'm going to do for you. And he says, I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now what's key about this is there's three components to the Abrahamic covenant. The first one is his promise to make Abram a great nation, which of course is Israel. We have now. So to promise to make him a great nation. The second one is a personal blessing, a personal promise. And that's when it's I'll bless you, make your name great, you will be a blessing. I'll bless those who bless you, and curse those who curse you. That's the personal aspect of the covenant. And then thirdly is we call the universal aspect of it. It says, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So the three parts of the Abrahamic covenant: the promise to make Abram a great nation, which is now in Israel. The personal blessing of I'll bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And then thirdly, the promise that you'll be a universal blessing to the entire world. And in you, all the families of the world shall be blessed. This is going to be very important going forward here in chapter 2. So this is why when, this is first made in chapter 12, we fast forward to Genesis 15, he's gone through some rough times, Abraham has, and he's like, what? You said you would make me a great nation. You said, that the entire world would be blessed. And I don't even have a son. And the Lord says, don't worry. I got you. And that's when Abram believed. And God counted him as being righteous. Now Abram was right with God. He believed. He had a relationship with God because God showed grace to Abram because of his faith. Not because of the works Abram did, but because he believed. That's hard to imagine, isn't it? The Abrahamic covenant was made back in Genesis 12. But it's not until Genesis 15 that all of a sudden we have Abram being counted righteous. He was chosen by God in his grace. And even in his doubt, God showed grace to him. To say, no, I got you. Don't worry about it. See, so much of our culture is about getting ahead, isn't it? It's about working, competition. And competition isn't bad. But when competition to get ahead becomes the goal of everyone's lives, we see people in authority. We think, well, what do they get to get there? Who do they step on to get there? What do they do? In our work, we know someone who's a fast riser. Someone who started out but is doing really good, and you can tell they're kind of on the fast track, and people like someone's trying to jump on their curtails and ride that. I saw that in the Air Force. You get an officer in, he's actually a really great guy, and he'd say, man, I kind of want to come buddy with this guy and ride his coattails because he's going places, he's doing great things, and if I can be associated with that, I can get ahead. It's all about competition, trying to get ahead, trying to get the next promotion, get the next best thing. And that bleeds over into our relationship with God. And how we think about it. We think that just like everything else in the world, we got to earn it, right? Everything else in this world, we got to earn. We have to do something to repay God. We got to do something. But that isn't how it works with God. If even the greatest examples we have in the Bible were not right with God because of their works, if Abraham is not right with God because of his works, if Paul's not right with God because of his works, how in the world is little old me going to make myself right with God by what I can do? Because what I can do is this compared to Abraham and Paul. I can do nothing compared to him. Culture tells us to study the habits of highly effective people. There's books on it. To model a work ethic, the drive people have. And that's fine for everyday living. It's good to be driven, to have a good work habit. But we cannot apply that to our righteousness before God. We just can't. It has nothing to do with how much we work and how much we serve and all this good stuff. Our righteousness before God is nothing when it comes to works. If even the greatest biblical characters and examples throughout history we have cannot attain it. Then Paul moves on to a cool example here. He's making a great point. And his point he's working here in verses 4 and 5, he's making the point that God does not owe us. He justifies us freely. God does not owe us a thing. He justifies us freely. Picking up in verse 4, where it says, now, to the one who works, his wages are not counted as a gift, but as his due. And then he goes, and now the one who does not work, but believes in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted as righteousness. Paul is pointing again to the fact that works have no part in justification, because God's justification is given freely. Now, if you notice, we have a word repetition going on here, starting in verse 3. When it says, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him. Now in verse 4, his wages are not counted as a gift. Verse 5, his faith is counted as righteousness. In verse 8, blessed is the man against whom the Lord will not count his sin. Okay, we have a repeating word. It's the exact same word in Greek in every one of those instances. Count is going on. And this is a financial term, an accounting term we use in charging an account or looking at your debts and your credits. This is a financial term that Paul is using in our relationship with God. When he says in verse 3, it was counted to him as righteous. That's God, and Abraham's ledger in his relationship with God, it was his faith, the fact that he believed is what credited him the righteousness. And now we're getting into, he's using the example of working, which is a great use of the word, because when you get work, you get paid, right? That's a financial thing that happens. Verse 4, now the one who works, his wages are not counted as a gift, but as is due. That's self-explanatory, right? If you work for someone, or you work for a boss, right, they're obligated to pay you, right? That's the understanding. Often you might have a contract, might have a handshake agreement, whatever it is, you're doing work for somebody, or you have a boss, they're obligated to pay you. If at the end, at the end of a work week, at the end of a job, and they give you the money that they owed you anyway, they say, oh, here's a gift for you. You're like, no, this is not a gift. It's what you owe me, right? A gift would be above and beyond that. No, this is what you owe me anyway. Don't try to call it a gift. This is where it's a great example of our relationship before God and trying to understand that our works do not make sense when it comes to our righteousness. Because if the pay the worker receives is what he's owed, is what he's due, he's supposed to get paid, it's not a gift, then if our righteousness, if us being in a right standing before God was because of our works, then God owes us the righteousness. Now, does that make any sense? The Creator owing his creatures? No. God is not beholden to any one of us. But see, if we think that, okay, if I work this, I'll be in a better place before God. No. Because that means that God now owes you for that. If you think you're earning something with God, you're not. I love that example. Never thought of that before. God is not obligated to his creation. He's not bound by his creatures. It's a gift. Now, this is the contrast, using the verse 4 as an example. Verse 5 is a contrast. And the one who does not work. Now, I'm going to stop right there. This is not a verse about laziness. Okay? Context, right? Don't rip this sucker out and say, hey, God doesn't want us to work. Because if you rip this out of context and just read it by itself, you'd be like, yeah, God says to be lazy. No. Context, okay? And the one who does not work. So what kind of work is he talking about? That work to earn God's favor, right? The work to make yourself right before God. That's what he's talking about. The one who does not work to make himself right with God, but believes in him, in the Lord, who justifies the ungodly. His faith is counted as righteousness. This is the contrast going on here. They believe, that same word again. Believe. Him who justifies the ungodly. This is a huge statement. Because this is exactly what God does. Remember, the Jews kind of viewed themselves as the godly people. We got ourselves in shape. We got ourselves in order. We're God's chosen people. We're good to go. And what does Paul say here? No. God justifies the ungodly. That includes the Jews. That includes us, because every single one of us is ungodly. Without the work of God, we are all ungodly. But it's our faith, not the works. Our faith is what gives us that righteousness. That's all it takes. I mean, we get paid, Bernice gives me my paycheck every month for the month of work that I've done. Those missions gives me the paycheck for the work I've done. And that's because I'm owed that. I've poured my heart and soul into it. I should be owed that money. Not in our relationship with God. It just doesn't work. It doesn't add up. We don't get to manipulate God. He doesn't owe us anything. And that's just why righteousness has to be a free gift. Let's face it, if it was a free gift to be earned, we'd be fighting over it, right? We'd be like, but I did more than that person. Why am I not righteous? We become like kids. But I did. Look what I did. Why didn't I get the righteousness? We would devolve to that, seriously. If we had to earn it, right? We had to spend our whole lives trying to earn our righteousness. And then, boom, you get hit by a car and you die. And you were just one good act away from being righteous. How horrible would that be? It makes no sense for us to function. But yet that thinking that we have to earn favor with God still seeps into our brain because of how culture makes it in us. We have to earn everything we have. We have to work hard for everything we have. When it comes to your relationship with God, that is free. It is free. The last point he makes here in 6 through 8, this free gift of being right with God is a blessing. I love this turn we're getting ready to have in his discussion. So after verse 3, he makes this point in verse 1 and 2 that Abraham was justified by faith, not by works. And in verse 3, he provides the scriptural evidence. Verses 4 and 5, so he provides a little illustration to prove his point. And now in 6, in 7 and 8, he's actually going to pull more scriptural support to prove his point. Because verse 6 starts off, just as David also speaks of the blessing of the one to whom God counts righteous apart from works. And now he quotes from Psalm 32. Blessed are those whose lawless deeds are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord will not count his sin. Oh, these are great things. We have sins being forgiven. We have sins being covered. And then these are verses from the Old Testament, right? We think of the Old Testament wasn't much about that. That's the New Testament thing. No, that's the Old Testament too. About sins being forgiven, sins being covered. Remember what's great about Paul making his point in these? Verse 3 was a quote from Genesis, the Torah, written by Moses about Abraham. So there's some heavy hitters there when it comes to the Jewish faith. Pulling from the Torah that was written by Moses and talking about Abraham. Now, in verse 7 and 8, he's pulling a quote from the Psalms, another section that was written by David. So Paul's pointing that, you know what? Not only Moses wrote about this in the Torah, about Abraham, the first Hebrew was saved by faith and not by works. But guess what? Let's fast forward to David's time, and David's still operating under the same understanding when he writes in the Psalm that the lawless deeds can be forgiven, his sins are covered. And blessed is the man against whom the Lord will not count his sin. Whoa! Those are big things we're pulling out of the Old Testament. He's proving his point here. Now you notice the repeating word in verses, starting in verse 6 is blessing. The blessing of the one. Verse 7, blessed are those. Verse 8, blessed are. And next week we're getting to verse 9. It says, it is blessing. So we're going to build on that blessing next week. But he starts to introduce it now of it being a blessing. Blessing is joy. It's to bestow favor upon. It's a good thing. The fact it is a free gift, it is amazing. It's a relief. It's a blessing. Truly think about it. If you being right with God was about works, then we all have to keep little ledgers, wouldn't we? You know, each day, okay, this is why I did good, this is why I did bad, you know, and then because, you know, I'll be your pastor in charge of your spiritual health, I have to be visiting you. Okay, how's your ledger looking? You know, you're not fudging the math, are you? Okay, because you know God already knows the math, okay? So, how's your good works doing? How's your bad works doing? How's it all add up? You know, that'd just be crazy. Talk about a paperwork nightmare trying to keep track of everyone's righteousness. Okay, where do you stand? Have you done enough? It doesn't make any sense. But so often this desire to work for our righteousness slips into our lives. We have struggles in our lives and we think, you know what? I can handle this on my own. I'm good. We're saying to God, I've got the power to fix myself. I can work it out. Maybe we have something coming up in our lives that make us start missing church. And I'll tell you, when I've reached out to people, one of the most common reply I've gotten is, I've got some things I need to work through. Oh, come on. I got some things I need to work out. I got some things, some stuff I need to sort out. Then I can get back to church. See, when we think about it objectively, it makes no sense that we can earn our favor with God. And yet, so often in our lives, how often do we flip that? Lord, I need to work on myself first before I can come to you. I got to handle this first before I come to you. It doesn't make any sense, but yet we do it. Whatever you're going through, and it may seem small, it may not seem a big deal, but it can become a big deal because instead of first coming to God and asking for the free gift, we huddle down inside of ourselves and we work hard to prove that we can do it on our own. It's a free gift. Start there. It's a free gift of forgiveness. It's a free gift of righteousness, being in a right place before God, being right with God. It's free. It's not something we have to work hard at. Yes, the rest of our Christian walk and figuring all that out, we have to work on. But in our relation with God, and are we in a right standing or not? Guess what? It's free. And the only reason it can be free is because of the price that Jesus paid on the cross for us, right? Our sin hadn't paid for, and Jesus went to the cross to pay that price. And so now we can have that free gift given to us because he paid the price for our sins. That's what's great. We do communion to remind us of that. So now as we turn to some songs to prepare our life for communion, we be thinking about, maybe there's areas in your life where you're like, you know what? I need to buckle down and work on these. I need to buckle down and get better on this. No, let's flip this and say, Lord, I need you. I need you in this area of my life that I'm struggling with. I need you to help me with this. Lord, be my anchor. Lord, I ask for forgiveness for any sins that are going on in my life. It's free. Just take and ask for it. And then, because of the free gift, because of the price that was paid, then we can work out our salvation. But first, being anchored in God, not in our works that we've done. Let us pray. Father, as we come now to sing songs and help prepare our hearts for communion, Father, I pray if there's even the smallest sin, the smallest struggle, The smallest area of concern can morph it and be worked into something that is not biblical in how we handle it. You think, I've got this, and you've done it. But we don't. Lord, help us to turn to you and the free gift of forgiveness, the free gift of righteousness, Lord, first and foremost. We cannot earn your favor by ourselves. And Lord, thank you, Lord, that beside that fact, you sent your Son to die for us. So Lord, prepare our hearts now for communion as we look forward to it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.